Disney Lorcana Challenge Toronto just wrapped, and taking the top spot was an Emerald Amber discard deck. I like to call it Citrus Discard. Now, this deck has been around the meta most of Ursula's Return, but really on the margins, although it did have two versions qualify for the top 64 in Dallas DLC, piloted by Zach Bivens and Jordan Serio. However, the one deck kind of keeping it down was the Emerald Steel discard deck with the dreaded Bucky, but with Bucky's errata in this particular format, this deck was unleashed and allowed to shine. And piloting this deck to the top spot in Toronto was somebody who'd been playing it all through set 4, Diego Saz. We had a chance to sit down and talk with Diego about his performance, his history with TCGs, and what he thinks about Emerald Amber discard.
Hi, I'm Diego Saz, also known online as Level 9001. I've been playing TCGs mainly online since 2015. First started in Hearthstone, started off casually, and then went more competitive in 2017, 2018. Traveled around, played in some events, and then I started looking into paper games. And right about that time, Lorcana was first coming out. So I started Lorcana right when it first came out, September 2023, and ever since then, fell in love, and Toronto DLC was the first ever Disney Lorcana challenge that I attended, and luckily got first place.
1 for 1. That's pretty good.
Yeah, one and done.
There you go. How does it feel to win a Disney Lorcana challenge? It's got to be kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is insane. Like, it just didn't feel real at the time. It just felt like I was in a dream. I was like, oh, wake up. But, it was reality. And coming off that win, you just realize, after getting all the prizes too, I have this full foil set collection and full enchanted of the newest set. I thought that I would never do that for any set, and then just seeing that in my hands, and then all these extra promo prizes, it felt like I'm starting to win the game of collecting Lorcana too. It was pretty cool.
That's awesome. So, Diego, I want to ask really quickly about your deck, because you chose to take in this Amber Emerald discard deck that had been kind of on the fringes of the top meta decks for most of the Ursula's Return. And then we saw a couple make the top 64 in Dallas. And then you chose to bring it in here. Why did you choose to bring in this Amber Emerald discard deck?
Yeah, I was playing this deck ever since the beginning of set 4. I always knew it was really strong, but what held it down the most was Emerald Steel with Bucky in it. And then going into this challenge, Bucky was going to be errated, so that was no longer an issue. And all the matchups just lined up really well with it. I just knew I was really favored in most matchups and never unfavored. And basically in any matchup, it was either even or just favored. So it's a deck that I've been playing a lot. I got a lot of reps with it, and I was very confident bringing it into Toronto. And I knew, if I just piloted it right and I matched up with those matchups that I've been practicing all set long, I would be pretty in a good spot.
Interesting. So you say that you're not unfavored into any matchup, you think. Which ones are your worst matchups, though? Which decks do you think are more 50-50?
Yeah, so I would say Steel Song, it can go either way. Like we saw in my finals match, I lost on the play. Usually you want to win on the play, but that's how things go. And then on the draw, I won and won again on the play. It's just one of those things where they could have a whole new world early on and mess up my discard plan, or I can have the Diablo Shift, Bare Necessities, Ursula combo, and then ruin their whole plan. So it's just, I feel like it's just a toss up of who gets the better cards at the right time. And if all lines up where I get the good cards, I find that I'm able to just win any matchup that way. And that's similar to how I feel Emerald Steel with Bucky was before it got errated, where they're able to just, if they were able to get the Bucky and Diablo package early on, they're just unstoppable. And I felt like that's pretty similar to this deck, but I've played it so much that if I don't get that line, I'm able to figure out different ways where I can actually win the matchup still.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that you lost game one, and I do want to ask about that real quick. You know, you're in the finals. It's a 3-game set. You lose game one. What's your mindset in that moment, and how do you keep that kind of resiliency to push on and win the next 2 games?
Uh, every game's a different game. That's how I look at it. I just don't think about that game. I go into the next one. And honestly, the only matchup where I was like physically feeling the nerves, was the matchup where I was trying to win the Golden Mickey. So after I won that top 8 going into top 4 matchup, everything just felt better. I was just like, okay, everything is just icing on the cake. Let's just take this easy. If I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. And I felt like having that attitude going into the finals made it easier for myself. And it can be probably nerve wracking for a lot of people with all the lights going on, the whole crowd. Like, you just kind of have to zone it out, look at what you're doing, play like how you normally play, and just take every game one at a time.
First, I really want to ask a little bit about your deck, and I'm going to ask a few specific questions, but first, kind of open-ended. What cards in this deck do you think people underestimate or misunderstand?
Yeah, and I think the biggest one that people literally do not understand sometimes and actually happened throughout the challenge was the Hidden Cove. It's the 1 cost location that has 6 willpower, 0 lore on it, and if you move a character to that location, they get 1+1 strength, +1 willpower themselves. So that location is able to stop a lot of different cards that the opponent would normally have that can answer some of my cards. So that would be basically Brawl, and that's in the Ruby Amethyst deck. They would normally be able to take out my Diablo with a Brawl that only has 2 strength. But if it's in the Cove, it has 3 strength. Now they can't do anything to it. Brawl is useless now, or they have to take out my Cove. And it can also it can buff up my characters so they're out of that 1-shot range. So this actually happened in a matchup of mine where I had Cricky in the Cove, which made him 4 strength, 5 willpower. It's clearly in my Cove, but my opponent, for some reason, kind of ignored that and still attacked my Cricky with Lawrence. And the Lawrence had 4 strength, 4 willpower, and that made the Lawrence just disappear. And they probably thought, oh, it was still 3-4, but there's a slight mess up there, and that really, it helped my game for that. But yeah, that's just one of those cards where you have to like really pay attention to who's in the Cove and make sure you play around that as well.
So one of the things I've noticed with this deck is that it does have a hard time closing sometimes. There are builds of this deck where there aren't very many cards with high lore. You have Prince John with 2 and maybe 1 or 2 other cards, and it feels like you discard them down and then take a while to close. But you've included in here a couple higher end cards. You've got Cricky with 3 lore. You've got 1 Lucifer. What was the decision like what was the thought behind including some of these higher end finishers that you don't see in some of these other versions of this deck?
Yeah, Cricky is probably the most important one since it has 3 lore. It costs 5. I have 3 copies of my list, and it used to be 2, but the more and more games I played, you start to realize you start inking some of those early game, and then you're like, late in the later game, you need to put the pressure on before they can start top decking cards. So Cricky is just a good answer for that because it can just really put that 3 lore pressure on each turn, and having it up to 3, now I can actually use some of the cards that I didn't ink. And then Lucifer is also really good where he quests for 2 and also discards. So I think having a good balance of some of those higher questers can really close out the game before they can, top deck an answer for what you're doing.
So, what are your ideal first three or four? So, what are your ideal first three or four? My editor's gonna love this. All right, so we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but what are your ideal first 3 or 4 turns like with this deck? What are you trying to do in the early game?
Yeah, it depends kind of on your matchup, but generically, I guess it would be you want to keep the Diablo package if you have it. So, turn 1, you play Little Diablo. Turn 2, you would shift on the bigger Diablo onto it, discard a song, and then if you had Hidden Cove, you can play that as well and move the Diablo to the Cove. So that would stop it from being, Storm Raged on or Brawled. It really takes it out of a range of a certain, like a lot of different cards. And then on turn 3, we really want to start to see that discard package start to roll and get that set up. So Prince John on 3, set up with the following turn on You Forgotten Me to discard some of their cards. So what I really like to do is kind of just make them run out of resources before I deal with their board. Because if we're taking out their ink, taking out their cards, they can't answer our board, and it would be easier for us to set up those multiple cards that can be used to sing Under the Sea. So once we hit that turn 5, we can play Kita and Under the Sea sing with what we've been playing the turns before. And that's kind of ideally what it is. Discard their hand, make sure they're not able to ink, use up their resources, and then just wipe it all out with Under the Sea.
So you're kind of playing this sub game of force them into top deck mode, reduce their resources before starting to move into the late game strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And there are some decks that kind of like do well versus that. They're one of those being Ruby Sapphire, where a lot of their cards that they are top decking are high cost cards. They're playing big Sisu, B prep. Those can really hurt our plan. So matchups like those, depending if you're on the play, on the draw, really matter. So like on the play, I'm able to play Ursula 2 on turn 2 to take out their 1 jump ahead. So they can't ramp up to that high end cost. But on the draw, they're able to do that. So then they're able to get to that high ink count by the time I'm able to just fully discard them, and then they're able to come back that way. So this deck is really good on the play. It might suffer on the draw versus some decks, and that's what the 2-game format probably. Some people were scared to play this deck for that reason, but you have to adapt, and there are ways you can still win on the draw. And just a lot of the times it just comes down to what are you drawing in the early game. Diablo package really does help with get all your cards that you do need. I guess Steel Song, that is like a kind of like a 50-50 matchup, and where it becomes 50-50 is depending on how the other person's playing. So Steel Song, there's a lot of songs in the deck. So there's kind of like that meta game where if the Steel Song player isn't keeping songs in their opening hand, I can't take them out. I can't take out their resources. And I'm stuck just playing this Ursula 2 that does nothing. So if you're the Steel Song player, I feel like they should just be keeping their characters and then draw into their songs instead, so then they'll have more resources. They can, use Ariel to draw into a whole new world and then sing it. And that's where maybe somebody might just mulligan incorrectly and end up keeping songs. And then if you do happen to just have songs, there are the right amount of number to keep would be 3. Just because if you have 2, I might be able to take out 2 by turn 2, and you're not able to have that third song to be used to remove my Diablo or whatever it is. Because if Diablo sticks and then you start to get behind, I get too much resources, and then you could just lose that way.
So Shimmering Skies has been released and is now legal in Lorcana challenges and set championships coming up. Are there any cards from Shimmering Skies that you are going to work into this deck or that kind of intrigue you when it comes to your build?
Yeah, there's the new Ana card that's legendary, 3 cost, uninkable. Um, Quest for 2 strength, 3 willpower, and then it has the ability where you can pay 2 ink on when you play it to either discard a card, give it a character +2 strength, or um, banish a damaged character. And I think the flexibility in that card, while also being able to discard, which what the deck really wants to do, um, can be it can really be usefully in the deck. And then it can also be bounced back by muses, so you can also just keep recurring that discard over and over again if you need to, or use it to take out like a big character like Tamatoa or something like that. So it's a really flexible card. That's one card that I would feel like trying. There's You're Welcome. It's a 4 cost song that you can remove any location, item, character, shuffle it into your opponent's deck, and then they draw 2 cards, or it can even be used on one of your characters to shuffle something into your deck, and then you draw 2 cards. So if you're ever, in a pinch, you can do that. Draw 2 cards and hopefully get something that you need. That's another card that I feel like would be good for the deck, and really, there's not too much that can be changed to it because it's such a solid deck so far. But I feel like there might be some people theory crafting and testing right now, and they might have a secret sauce. But so far, yeah, my head's always been in Toronto Set 4 format, so I haven't really thought too much into Set 5 yet. And right now, I'm just taking a soft break after the win. Just celebrating it, taking it in.
Well, focusing on Set 4 definitely did you well, so can't argue with the results. So how did you prepare for Disney Lorcana Challenge Toronto? What did you do to get ready, to test your deck out? And, what did you do that kind of carried you through the finals here?
Yeah, well, being having played the deck ever since the beginning of Set 4 has really helped. Been able to keep up with all different lines of plays against different matchups. Since then, I took the deck to my Ursula Set Champs locals and did well with it there too. And then when I didn't do well, it was all into Emerald Seal Bucky. And that's how I knew the deck would be strong at Toronto. And yeah, prepping for that, I just went to my locals. I also played online with some of my testing groups and able to just really, test out those different lines against those popular decks that were all over Toronto, like Steel Song, Ruby Amethyst, Mufasa, and then Sapphire Ruby and Sapphire Steel. Those were the main decks that I faced against, and I kind of knew all the different lines that I needed to take. I knew how I lost those games, so I really need to prepare for that as well. And yeah, I just knowing your deck in and out, doing multiple games with them, and just knowing all the different kind of lines you need to take is really important. And even when I was at Toronto, I stayed at the venue and I was practicing the night of going into my second day. I knew what my first matchup was, and I was just practicing in the lobby that matchup with some friends, and that really helped just get you prepared mentally for that matchup. And actually, a Ravensburger employee was walking by and saw us playing, and they were like, "Oh, I love what you're doing. You guys are just playing Lorcana here at night. This is what it's all about. Here, have a Pinocchio promo." And I was like, "Oh, that's pretty sweet."
This was your first major Disney Lorcana tournament. I mean, like big Disney Lorcana tournament. What advice do you have for people who are looking to take the plunge into competitive play and perhaps participate in a tournament of this size for the first time?
Yeah, I think you just you just do it, right? Prepare, watch a lot of videos online about what you can expect at the Lorcana challenge, and also kind of get a feel of what decks you think will be there as well. So look at past results. Kind of, I think a lot of people look at past results and would see the top deck. Oh, I'm going to bring this to the challenge now. But people that are trying to win the challenge are trying to counter those decks. So they're always thinking that next step ahead. So also try to keep up with that. Go through the next step ahead, and don't always try to do what the last person did, but use that to do the next best thing. So there is a lot of, you know, trying to play around that and beat the meta basically. And I would say keep up with what you know, and then try to use skills that you've learned from playing the game and try to get ahead of the meta. And that's kind of what I did. Amber Emerald wasn't super represented at the challenge. There was a few of us, but I ended up at top bringing this deck. And yeah, I feel like if you're just ahead of the meta and keep up with what is out there and practice those games, you can probably do well yourself.
And it sounds like play a deck that you're familiar with, that you've practiced with a bunch instead of grabbing something new. Because this is a deck, as you said, that you played for quite a while.
Yeah, that is the biggest thing. I think that is the biggest thing for anyone. Don't change your deck last minute. I highly, highly encourage that. Even for set champs where I'm like, oh, I don't think this is the right deck, but this is the deck I've been practicing and plan on playing, and then the night before I change it, it goes terribly every single time. Every single time. Just play with what you're going to play with, stick to it, commit to it, and I guarantee you it's going to do better than what you would do if you changed it last minute.
So, assuming this deck doesn't change a whole lot with Shimmering Skies out, how do you think this deck is positioned in the meta moving forward?
I don't think I see it as being, the top deck. It's still a deck that you need to watch out for and play around, but there's a lot of new cards that kind of counter it, and those cards being Pete and Steel, that stops you from playing any actions the following turn. So this deck is heavily reliant on using songs and actions. So that just makes this do nothing for turns and turns, and that can stop it. And there's also Clarabelle, the 7-cost Emerald card that's a 5/6, and at the end of the turn, it just refills your hand. So say if we're discarding their whole hand, they top deck a Clarabelle, but we've been drawing a lot of cards with Prince John, they just get a whole new hand. It's like a whole new world in a single card. So that's another card that kind of keeps us down. So in this deck might not be the best deck going into set 5, but it's still one to watch out for because it's pretty strong.
Why is Emerald Amber good?
Why is it good? Yeah. It's good because it can do a lot of things in a single turn. I would say you're able to discard the other opponent's resources, you're able to draw a lot of cards on your turn. It puts a lot of pressure early game by discarding those resources, and it generally makes the game unfun for the other person, but more fun for you. So if a deck is really making it fun for you and unfun for the other person, I think that's good, but for one person.